Hello, it's Ren Presents time. I'm your host Ren, and today we continue with the Belmont Saga, the last two prologues, and then chapter 1 of part 1, known as The Old Dream. So last week I mentioned it in the body of the video, but I omitted about 10 pages worth of prologue number 2, The Appointment. I had recorded it, I was ready to edit it in, and I was thinking, this is a lot of extraneous material. All it's doing is just slowing everything down. I'll just cut it out. And all it was Captain Davidge giving Lord Stenstrom advice. Don't do what the admirals say if less they're within 100,000 stellar miles. Don't ferry the admirals around like a taxi service. If you do that, then the other captains won't have any respect for you. And that's what the previous captain did of the Seeker, Captain Gona. He ferried the admirals around a lot without complaint, and all the other captains had no respect for him. And so he said, don't fall into that trap, don't become an admiral's man. And it was 10 pages, it just took too long. So I'm like, forget it, I'll just cut it out. And you really can't tell, due to my unmonetized editing skills, you really can't tell where that stuff was and where it wasn't. So out it went. Stenstrom went out there and got into a British Parliament style row with the admirals. They didn't like his HRN coat. The HRN stands for Hoban Royal Navy, which was an upstart association of yachtsmen from Hoban. And Hoban is a very influential league world near the Zafin border. It's probably second only to Cana as far as importance in the league. Although the sisters, since they make their home on Cana gets precedence. But Hoban is one of the bigger league worlds. Hoban Royal Navy was a bunch of yachtsmen and yachtswomen who decided we don't need the fleet, we'll just do it ourselves. And they bought a bunch of spacefaring corvettes and came up with very elaborate, very, very stylish clothes. And their ranks were designated in fruits, as the Admiralty so ingraciously pointed out. But they were mostly a failure. Princess Marlith of Xandar had a field day on the Hoban Royal Navy, defeated them in battle several times, leading to the fleet having to come and save their asses on more than one occasion. Eventually, they disbanded. Many of them were arrested. A few were executed, and some just went into exile and retirement. All their corvettes were smelted down, and all their clothes, their uniforms, were mostly burned, except for Paymaster Stenstrom's that he found in a box in a secondhand store in the city of Minsk. And seeing that coat pissed the admirals off, and they get into a contentious name-calling and fruit-throwing situation till Captain Davidge put a stop to it. He was appointed because he met all the criteria and he had a lot of money, which was most important. So we move on. There's 2 more really short prologues, and then we get into chapter 1 of part 1, which is also really short. The first one is prologue number 3, an open letter from the Fiend of Calvert to the Mad Lord of Walther. And as we discovered in the previous prologue, the Mad Lord of Walther was a eccentric vigilant from the eastern city of Rustum. It's in the Esterlands. A city, and this guy lived there, and he wore beautiful elaborate clothing and a mask, and he was a vigilant, like basically a superhero. He would prowl the streets and rooftops of Rustum, performing feats of mind and body that even people with the various gifts of the mind, like the gifts of strength, couldn't match. He could do a lot of things, and his arch enemy was Lord Cold, a pirate. And he and Lord Cold duked it out for many, many years until the Mad Lord really seemed to go stark raving mad, started revealing all kinds of secrets, and then the sisters executed him. But the Mad Lord was one of Lord Stenstrom's heroes as a boy, and we'll see that Lord Stenstrom actually met the Mad Lord of Walther, chose him as a role model, and sort of kind of styled himself after the Mad Lord. His coat, his hat, his metal boots, which is a Tyrol thing from where he comes from, the city of Tyrol. That's the kind of boots they wear, and his mask, which kind of looks like the Mad Lord's mask, but his mask he needs to save his soul from demons. But we'll get into all that later. So the Fiend of Calvert, who is a Jack the Ripper style killer, roamed the streets of the city of Calvert for about 30 years, killing lots and lots of people. The Mad Lord of Walther was hired by Lord Gerald Catherbaum, who was a prominent citizen in Calvert, to deal with the Mad Lord, as nobody else seemed to be able to get rid of this fiend, whoever he is. And the Mad Lord came and defeated the Fiend of Calvert, and the fiend was never seen again. However, the fiend did pen a letter, at least someone claiming to be the fiend, penned a letter to Synthnet, which is like Reuters in my world. It's a journalistic amalgamation of people who turn in news stories and post them throughout the league. So the Fiend of Calvert, who you'd be wondering, why do I have a Victorian-looking mad killer, Jack the Ripper-esque, running around in the story? And you'll see that the Fiend of Calvert is actually very connected to all the main characters that we're going to meet here, Lord Stenstrom being one of them. You'll find that connections and circles is a big theme in this book, and so this fiend is related to these people in one way or the other. So the fiend writes a letter to the Mad Lord of Walther calling him out. And then we have prologue number 4 called Twins, which is basically gives the name of the book, which is Sands of the Solar Empire, its name. It deals with Cana, which, as I mentioned, is one of the more prominent lead worlds, and its celestial twin, Onaris, and also Baz, because they're in the same star system. But the twins refers to Cana and Onaris. And after that, we enter part 1 of the book, The Admiral's Pleasure, chapter 1, The Old Dream. And all of these are very short, so let's get to it. Prologue number 3, An Open Letter from the Fiend of Calvert to the Mad Lord of Walther. Published February 32nd, 3119 AX, Synthnet, St. Edmunds.
I am he who is known as the Fiend of Calvert.
I trawled the streets and the wharves there,
Shutting the eyes of drunks, abusers, frauds, and fallen men.
as rats are occasionally cleaned from the sewers and other places of refuse. I clean the Calvert streets of elder scum.
I should be praised. I should be given a key to the city. Instead, I was grievously wounded by the coward who calls himself the Mad Lord of Walther.
He fell upon me from behind, applied a harassing wound, and then chased me across the rooftops, laughing throughout the entire ordeal. Though pained, I managed to escape and had to spend a significant amount of time convalescing the injury he so cowardly inflicted upon me.
Meanwhile, the filth in Calvert festers and grows afresh. Without the cat to keep the mice thinned, they overrun. I have read your memoirs, Mad Lord. A fanciful bit of fiction, I must say. You claim that I am a lady You say you saw me as a woman in gray, and I can assure you, sir, I am no woman. Would a woman be capable of doing what I have done?
If you would care to prove that you are no woman, sir, I challenge you to meet me in Calvert, and we may settle our dispute once and for all. Fail to meet me, and I might choose to call upon Calvert afresh and resume my art at long last, as there are many throats there needing cutting. This time, you shall not catch me unawares. Signed, Unknown, the Fiend of Calvert.
Woohoo! What was that? Well, and with that, we conclude prologue number 3, an open letter from the Fiend of Calvert to the Mad Lord of Walther. Well, that was scary, wasn't it? The Fiend basically calling out the Mad Lord of Walther for defeating him in the rooftops of St. Edmunds. And again, all these characters that we're going to meet are closely related, including this creepy madman who appears to be alive and well after disappearing for a long period of time. We'll see how close this fiend is to many of the characters. He was just a rooftop away in some instances. And the more we learn, the more we discover how these connections are deeply ingrained. So that was that. That was scary. I'm glad it's over with. Now, let's proceed to the final prologue, Prologue 4, Twins. And then we move on to Part 1, Chapter 1, The Open Dream. The heart of the League consists mostly of 2 planets, Cana and Onaris. There are many more League worlds that have been added over the years, but Cana and Onaris are the principals, the bastions of the League. Like 2 great rocks facing each other on a vast beach. The other rocks might someday be washed up or eroded into view, but these 2 were the originals, and all others came later. They are, in the cosmic scheme of things, neighbors in space, twins, almost. To a fast fleet ship, traveling the distance from Cana to Onaris can, depending on the time of year, take less than a day, perhaps a little more if the ship is in no hurry. Slower ships like fleet merchantmen, frigates, and private vessels might make the trip in 2 days, perhaps 3, if they were particularly slow. Moving through the patrolled lanes between the 2 planets is like nothing. Hardly a thought went into it. It was a boring trip, a maudlin one at that. Modern vessels, even the unsightly rusty ones, could move at colossal speed, luxurious in safety and all the comforts of home. Cana and Onaris, 2 great rocks facing each other on a celestial beach, awash in the surf and bound together by cosmic sand. Consider this, though. Take away those modern ships, take away that speed and technology, and suddenly the small space between the 2 planets widens into a dark gulf full of the foreboding and the unknown. The grains of sand on the beach separating the 2 rocks, now insurmountable and endless. Cana is the 3rd planet in the Beta Terrigen system, orbiting an energetic G-class star, warm and yellow. 0.4 light-years away is Onaris, the 10th planet in the new Toriander system. Its star a larger A-class globe, the Johnnies call Old Scrub, with an outlying Class 2 dwarf star companion not far away. Orbiting 2 slots down from Onaris is Baz, a terraformed newcomer. Being so far from Old Scrub, Baz had pretty tough winters, but was baked hard in the summer from the dwarf star they called Lil Whiteface. As summers and winters on Baz depended on planetary positioning rather than rotational tilt, the whole planet was in winter or in summer at once. An extreme place, lots of misfits went to Baz, the frontier. Lots of people with things to hide went to Baz in the old EX days before the Zaphins left. Cana and Onaris, 0.4 light years apart. That is still quite a lot of empty space between the two. Space that isn't really all that empty. The League engineers have charts and maps detailing the mundane stellar bodies lying between Cana and Onaris. The nebulas, comets, asteroid fields, clouds of frozen methane, and the like. However, most League charts center on the shipping lanes, the direct path ships use to make the journey from Cana to Onaris and back. Go off the shipping lanes, and one enters the wildlands, the unknown, where the small spaces truly become huge and engulfing. None, other than the local daredevils and old hermits riding the frontier past Drury's belt, truly knew what was there, and nobody else really cared. What difference did it make? Here and there, gone in a blink, and a surge of speed. The sands of the solar empire, forever vast and unknown, stepped over with speedy ships moving entirely too fast to see what was there. And with that, we conclude the prologues. That's the end of prologue. It was prologue 4. Just a brief glimpse into what's going to be happening in this book. That Cana and Onaris, not very far apart, using modern fleet vessels and technology, can cover the distance between these two planets in a day. Sometimes less if they're really, really hoofing it. But what is really out there, no one knows. It's a wild and woolly place, and that should be giving a little foreshadowing into what's going to happen in this book. What happens between Cana and Onaris when great speed is not available and one wanders off the shipping lanes. We now can enter Part 1, The Admiral's Pleasure at Long Last. Chapter 1, The Old Dream. And this is only 3 pages long too, so we should be able to knock this out and we'll be done with this week's reading. So here we go. Part 1, Chapter 1, The Old Dream. The day before he was to take command of his vessel, Stenstrom returned to his ancestral manor south of Tyrol by the sea. His father was there, and so were many of his 29 sisters. They sat in the great dining room his mother once loved, and toasted to him and to his success. After dinner, he briefly went out to the hill across the lane and stood in front of his mother's gravestone. After all this time, he still missed her. Late that evening, he sat in his father's study with his 2 favorite sisters, Lyra and Virginia. His father had been a fleet captain on the warbird Caroline for decades, and Stenstrom intently listened to his advice. His father, giddy with excitement, thoroughly briefed his son on what to expect in the days ahead. "You have an old ship to nurse back to fighting health. She's a good ship, a strong ship. I expect the next few months shall be rather sedate as you settle into command and oversee the Seeker's refits. Be certain to take an active role in the refits. Do not allow some admiral or fleet engineer to run the whole thing untempered. Assert your command as captain from day one. Put your nose into places where it might not belong. Do not be afraid to ruffle feathers and stand tip to tip with those prima donnas. Next, you shall need to recruit an engineer and a bosun. Again, do not allow the Admiralty to select one for you. Be bold. Be aggressive. Go out and make your pitch to those you feel you can trust. If you wish it, I happen to have a list of names I think would make fine additions. Take them as you wish." "Thank you, Father." Stenstrom the older stood and poured 4 glasses of fine brandy. "Here's some of the good stuff. To my son, Lord Stenstrom, captain of the Seeker." "To Bell, my favorite brother," Lyra said. "I hope you'll let me come aboard and cook for you and your crew sometime, Bell," Virginia said. Stenstrom laughed. "Well, my mouth is already watering." They clinked their glasses and drank. Stenstrom the older said, knocking it back. "Though your mother protested and inconvenienced you as only she could, I am certain she would have been so proud of you today, as I am. Your mother loved you very much, and as you are well aware, that love carried with it a bit of an ordeal. Your mother could be overbearing, but she never meant anything not in your best interest. All in all, I think it made you a better man, better ready to lead." Stenstrom stood there and remembered his departed mother. Elders rest her soul. The 4 of them were quiet for a moment. He truly wished his mother could be here and see what he'd become. That night he slept in his boyhood bedroom. He had a troubling dream that night. One of those select dreams that reoccur periodically throughout one's life. It was a dream that he had first as a little boy, and it never failed to come back to him before momentous occasions, like this one. He dreamed of himself as a little boy, barely 10 years old. He was playing in a vast sandpit behind the family manor, along with Lyra and Virginia. Under the warm sun of the afternoon, his black-haired sister, Lyra, played in the sand along with him. Virginia sat nearby, stuffing her face with something from the kitchens, watching them play. Virginia, with her mottled head of silver-black hair, was not nearly as tomboyish as Lyra was. Laughing, he and Lyra scuffled in the sand. Lyra was several years older than he was, and much bigger. She got him in a headlock and threw him to the other side of the sandpit. He could remember the feeling of flying through the air, a brief look at the sky as he fell into the unbroken sand, the puffy clouds, and he always recalled seeing stars out on the horizon in a squarish constellation, even though it was broad daylight. The stars shone clearly. His dream was always the same. The sand, his sisters, the wrestling, the stars. He hit the sand, and then, as always, the dream became muddled. There was a great clamor. Something hidden in the sand jumped out with terrifying speed. There was a snap. In his dream, he could see his 2 sisters standing there, Lyra in the sand with him, and Virginia nearby. They were both staring at him. Virginia dropped the thing she was eating. It plopped into the sand. Her mouth was full of food, but she didn't chew. Lyra then turned and ran. "Mama, Mama!" she screamed. Virginia just stood there, open mouth. As always, the last thing he could remember at the end of the dream was Lyra returning to the play area, leading Mother by the hand. "Belle? Belle!" his mother screamed. "Belle!" And that was all he could ever remember. That was the end of the dream. Whenever he had the old dream, it stayed with him all day long, just on the outskirts of his thoughts, lingering. He sighed and tried to put the dream out of his head. He dressed, said his goodbyes to his father and sisters, and headed south to begin his new life as fleet captain. And with that, we conclude Part 1, Chapter 1, The Old Dream. So, this dream that he describes having, this where he's playing in the sand with his sister, Lyra was always very much a tomboy, very rough and ready, and they two were always going at it. It was always said Lyra was the son that Lord Belmont the Older, Stenstrom's dad, never had, at least until Stenstrom showed up. And Lyra had the same dreams that Stenstrom had. She wanted to join the fleet, and she wanted to soar the stars, but she didn't. Just like Stenstrom, she didn't follow her dreams, and the reason for that will become clear later in the book. His dream is they're in the sand pit and they're scuffling around like kids like to do, and their sister sister Virginia was always a hangers on, being very close in age. That those three were the closest. His other sisters, there's 29 of them, were much older in age, and most of them were gone, living in their own homes at that point in time. But Lyra throws him into a part of the sand pit that was untouched, and something that was hidden in the sand came out, and it frightened everyone so bad. Lyra ran and got their mother, and when she brought him and she saw what was happening in the sand pit, his mother started screaming his name. But that's all he could remember of that dream. Whatever was in the sand, he doesn't remember. Apparently he suffered no ill effects. But that dream comes to him often, and it comes later on in the book, and eventually he will learn what the full meaning of that dream and what actually happened, and why, despite whatever was in the sand, he was unharmed. And we will find that out later. Next week, we continue into things that are going to start happening fast here in part 1 of the book. Chapter 2, St. Porter's Day. And St. Porter's Day is a holiday in the League. That's very important in world building. You add, it's not always just action and adventure and scary castles and hidden treasure. Just mundane things like holidays and festivals. Things like that really help add a touch of spice to the world you're creating. So St. Porter's Day is a holiday. There's quite a few in the League. There's Nether's Day and Saluting Day. There's quite a bit. And St. Porter's Day is supposed to be a day of friendship, of making new friends. And it's supposedly, if you make a friend on St. Porter's Day, that person will be a friend for life. And we'll see how all that plays out next week. Until then, this is Ren Presents. I'm your host, Ren. Peace